a very muggy, rainy day in New York. If you're watching on the AFA channel, you see on your screen there a live shot just outside the studios, and the umbrellas are out, and it is quite a mess. And yet to come on the broadcast today, we will speak with Lila Rose of the liveaction.org group. A brand new film has been released by her group, and I am always touched at this young, dedicated soul's commitment to protecting the life of the unborn. But we're speaking right now with a man who is breaking news across this country. In fact, my syndicated piece just came out literally minutes before we were on the air. Raymond Ibrahim is his name, and I simply titled it "The Muslim Brotherhood's Connection to Benghazi." Townhall.com is the place where that usually appears first, and they've already shared it over 300 times in the last little bit. So it is there is keen interest in seeing this document for the people's own validity of what we're claiming here. But more important than the claim is what it means if it's actually true. And the reason that I have asked Raymond to join us is because he writes about this extensively, but also because he's uniquely qualified to write about it extensively as an Egyptian Coptic Christian himself, raised in a household that was firmly entrenched in Egyptian culture and society. And it was one of those things where when he began to look into these issues, he just felt he had to follow through on a life's pursuit to help, I guess, make the world a better place, Raymond, with your knowledge, and I appreciate that. He's an American research librarian. He's a translator. He's an author and a columnist, and he's author of the brand new book, and I firmly encourage you to get it. And I just lost it off the screen. Oh, here we go. I'll pull it up once again. It is The Crucified Again: Exposing Islam's New War on Christians. Exposing Islam's New War on Christians. And, of course, you can get that from the AFA Today Facebook page. I've already linked it up to today's show post, afatoday.com. You can delve into why Islam is at war with Christianity. And, Raymond, that's not, as you know, from someone who has to report on this, that's not supposed to be said in public company these days. If you say that around the White House, they will, shoot you daggers with their eyeballs. It's we're supposed to look the other way, it seems, whenever Islam is brought into the conversation. But if President Morsi was involved in the attack on Benghazi, if the Muslim Brotherhood, the ruling party in Egypt, was involved in the attack on Benghazi, on our consulate, killing our ambassador, killing two of our best and bold Navy SEALs, killing a retired airman who gave his life as the final greatest measure of his devotion to his country. What to quote Hillary Clinton, what difference does it make? Raymond, your response to that question.
Well, Kevin, basically, I just want to preface it by talking a little bit about Morsi himself, just to
Sure.
put some context. A lot of people are forgetful that aside from being a Muslim Brotherhood leader, this guy himself was in jail under Mubarak, not because he was this great pro-democracy, pro-freedom guy, but he was this great pro-Sharia, pro-Islamization kind of guy who was violent, or not necessarily violent, but he was radical, and he had a radical agenda, and he was trying to voice Islamic Sharia on Egypt, and this is why he was in jail. So after he got out of jail, he was freed by Hamas. He also freed any number of Islamic jihadis, including people who were involved, who were actually on death row under Mubarak for the murders and vicious crimes that they committed, including against Christian minorities, tourists, and so forth. So, I mean, just to give you a little background of what this guy's about. And he's on record vociferously calling for the release of the blind sheikh, who, of course, was involved in terrorism against the United States. So, I mean, all that right there should just give you an insight, above and beyond this document we're discussing, and above and beyond what exactly his role would be with the Benghazi thing, which we'll get to, because, of course, I believe he is a pivotal part of that attack. But so what I'm saying is, even before all this, the United States should have an idea of who this guy is and what he's about. And to give you another quick one, last week, a top Shia cleric in Egypt was brutally mauled and killed by a mob numbering in the thousands of Egyptian Sunnis, the average Egyptian Muslim in Egypt. And there's a video of it, and I mean, he's literally beaten to death, and 4 of his close followers. And so then you find out later, so who was responsible for inciting the Sunnis against the Shias? And all of a sudden, because a lot of the Arabic information I get, a lot of research are sending to me. So someone sends me a video of a Salafi cleric talking about how we have to purge Egypt of the Shias because that's what Mohammed Morsi just told us in a recent conference. So once again, you see, how something violent, very intolerant, vicious attack on a non-Muslim, because Sunnis look at Shias as non-Muslims, and you find at the very source of it, or at the bottom, you have Morsi. And this sounds very reminiscent of what we're discussing, which is the Benghazi attack. And so the significance of the Benghazi attack to America, of course, and Morsi's involvement in it, and like I said, even above that, his involvement in all these other things, his character, who he is, what he's about. I mean, the fact alone that he had the audacity to say, release the blind sheikh, is telling itself. I also got reports earlier that he was involved in helping Ayman Zawahiri, Al-Qaeda leader, who's, of course, of Egyptian background, to come back into Egypt from hiding in Afghanistan or Pakistan. And that he's likely in the Sinai. And the Sinai right now, under Morsi, has become basically an Al-Qaeda cell or a training ground, not unlike Afghanistan under the Taliban.
So, Raymond, let me ask you, because the indictment and the laundry list is long, and you've made that case well. Is the Obama administration ignorant to these truths, or do they refuse to believe that they're significant in any way?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. I mean, the facts are there, and so the question is, well, why is the Obama administration behaving the way it is? Is it ignorant, or does it know it? And I'll just give you another tidbit that happened from the Obama administration in the person of Ann Patterson, the ambassador to Egypt. So you're, of course, aware that yesterday the millions of people went protesting against Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood. So Ann Patterson, the ambassador, in her, I think, her very first meeting with the Coptic Pope, she didn't meet him when the Coptic St. Mark Cathedral was attacked. She didn't meet him in other times, but she met him right before the planned protest of June 30, and her request to him was to urge the Copts not to protest against Morsi. I mean, that right there, think of how telling that is of the U.S.'s bias for the Muslim Brotherhood. We heard that, well, we pushed Mubarak out because we wanted to help the people. Well, here's the people against the Islamization and the Sharia foisting by the Muslim Brotherhood on them, and now Ann Patterson is telling that group that especially suffers, the Christians, not to protest. And again, you can just see, and it's gotten to the point that your average Egyptian, who's a nominal Muslim, secular Muslim, or so forth, including a politician, recently called Ann Patterson a member of the Muslim Brotherhood sleeping cell. And there's placards and banners all over Egypt during the protests saying things like, Obama, you support terrorism, and so forth. And so to go to your question, of course the Obama administration must be at least cognizant of all of these allegations, or rather all these facts that we're discussing. And so why does it keep ignoring it? Why does it keep whitewashing it? Does it have an agenda? I think so. Obviously, they can't all be foolish. And obviously, some of them work under that. They are so brainwashed by, the propaganda that has taken the West by storm since the 60s, the multiculturalism, and, all violence is a product of poverty and so forth, and grievance. But I know others, and I think Obama, chief among them, are very much aware of what this group represents and who they are and what their agenda is. And yet, from one end of the Islamic world to the other, he's helping always the Islamists in Syria. He's helping the people who are regularly beheading people and killing them and torturing them and mutilating them and raping them. In Libya, he helped Al-Qaeda, and that's why we got Benghazi. In Egypt, he's helping the Muslim Brotherhood. In Nigeria, here's a nice one. In Nigeria, where it's half Christian, but where more Christians have been killed, and I talk about this in my book, again, more Christians have been killed in Nigeria by Muslims than all the others around the world by an Islamic jihadi group known as Boko Haram. What does John Kerry do? He comes out when the Nigerian government finally goes on a strong offensive to try to neutralize the jihadis and starts talking about the human rights of the jihadis and how you can't attack them and so forth. And yet, when Christians and other minorities are being killed ruthlessly by all these groups, you get nothing. And so if you really connect the dots, I mean, it's very obvious this administration knows exactly what it's doing. It understands it's empowering the Islamic jihadi future caliphate, and yet it's all being done in the guise of democracy and freedom, and, helping the people and so forth.
And the president has repeatedly said, the future does not belong to those that blaspheme Islam, but there's a difference in saying treat all faiths equally and don't be prejudiced against somebody because they have a particular faith, and turning around within 60 days of the president of that country involving himself in a terror attack that takes American lives in Benghazi and giving him 16 F-16 aircraft and 200 Abrams tanks. I mean, Raymond, either there's something else that the Obama administration is intending to help Morsi accomplish, or they are the most ignorant fools that have ever held public office. But it's hard to believe that there's some sort of innocent gap between one of those two conclusions.
If you look at it in naked kind of eyes, without reading too much into it, it's just basically you have a president or a leader who is just helping Islamists and always not helping non-Islamists, because that's exactly what it is in any country you look at right now. When there is a secular uprising, as happened in the Green Revolution in Iran or in Turkey, well, not a word comes out of the Obama administration, and it's not a big deal. It's kind of downplayed, and that's the end of it. But when it was basically Islamists and jihadis rising up against secular autocrats who, whatever their shortcomings are and were better than Islamic jihadis, immediately the Obama administration rushes in, like you're saying, gives them weapons. It's just so from a commonsensical point of view, the Obama administration is just in bed with Islamic jihadis. I mean, that's just the straightforward interpretation of what we're seeing.
Right,
now,
but the implication of that, though. But the implication of that, though, Raymond, is that we are feeding the sword that's going to chop our hand off. I mean, because there is no love lost between Morsi and the United States. If he had the opportunity, if he took lives in Libya, what would keep him from encouraging, feeding, sprouting, giving root to future Osama bin Ladens and encouraging them to do that against the evil West?
Look, Kevin, you touch on an immensely important point, which I've discussed earlier and which I'd like to really summarize, because it's very important right now, which is basically this. Al-Qaeda, which was born in the late 80s and 90s, occurred because the U.S. supported Islamists and jihadis against a common foe, which was the Soviet Union.
Right.
Okay, but at least there was logic then. We helped them because, well, there was a superpower against us. It was a war of proxy and so forth. But then early on, from the early 40s and 50s, the jihadis and the Islamists, like Sayyid Qutb, pointed out that what you need first and foremost in order to wage an effective jihad is a base. And they didn't have bases in Egypt. They didn't have bases anywhere because the secular autocrats always kicked them out and threw them in jail. So they finally got a base in Afghanistan, because then they had an Islamist Taliban regime who gave them freedom, and Al-Qaeda was born. And don't forget, the word Al-Qaeda simply means the base, because the base is important to them. And so everything was fine after Al-Qaeda was born and the Soviet Union was defeated. And then 10 years later, after all that wonderful peace, we got 9/11. And everyone was shocked, and everyone was wondering, why did they hate us? How did this happen? So forth. Today, fast forward, and Obama by himself it's not now just Afghanistan, one relatively unimportant nation, but Egypt, Syria, Libya, Nigeria, any country that's important. Here he is empowering Islamists and jihadis. Cells are forming left and right. As I was pointing out, in Egypt, in the Sinai, basically Al-Qaeda is there. It's taken over. Same thing in Libya, in various parts, in Syria. And so what's going to happen is it's going to look fine and peaceful once they do their thing, and we're not going to hear of an attack. But once Obama's gone, and years down the line, just like the way Al-Qaeda came into being, rest assured, all these forces are going to mobilize, and you're going to make 9/11 look like child's play. And again, when that happens, I guarantee you, people will once again stupidly, all the talking heads will be telling you what happened, what went wrong, why do they hate us? But it's going to be too late at that point. And so this is where we're at. We're in the calm before the jihadi storm, where Obama single-handedly is empowering Islamic jihadis all around the Islamic world, especially the most pivotal ones. And based on precedent, based on what happened to Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, 9/11 was a consequence of it, albeit years later. And this is exactly what's going to happen. And that's why something like Benghazi and Morsi, of course, Morsi, he's part of the Muslim Brotherhood. Their credo to this very day is that the Quran is our constitution, the Prophet is our leader, jihad is our way, death and martyrdom is our ultimate aspiration. This is a credo that Al-Qaeda would be proud of. And this is the guy that Obama is helping and giving him weapons.